Hello? Can you guys hear me okay? Well, welcome to our afternoon session on holistic health. I want to say a heartfelt thank you to our wonderful panelists. Some of them you're familiar with and some are new from this morning. So if you don't mind, I'll pass the microphone around and have each of them introduce themselves just in case you didn't know them from this morning. And then we'll open up the floor to questions. And again, the topic here is holistic health, which is a follow-up from the keynote this morning and also the panel this morning. So if it's okay, I'll start with you, Simeon.
Buyana. Good to see everybody here again. My name is Simeon John in English, and my Yupik name is Norak. I'm from Tuksuk Bay, which is a village in the southwestern coastal between the Yukon River and the Kuskokwim, in between Yukon Delta, right along the Bering Sea. And I've been living there all my life, and I have a family. What really interests me is the knowledge that our ancestors have always taught us about this, and especially my grandparents and my parents that passed the knowledge on to us. So I've been working with the youths, backing up a little bit with what I'd done before. I've been a behavioral health aide working with the youth and being a counselor for 18 years prior to this. And in the summertime, I commercial fish in Bristol Bay, and I've been doing it since the early 70s. So that's me.
My name is Georgiana Ningluk. I've been the lead prevention coordinator in Scammon Bay for the past 5 years, but recently our grant ran out, but I still consider myself the lead prevention coordinator in Scammon Bay. So my job was to, coordinate activities with our youth. And I don't know if they have it here, but we did a lot with our youth, especially during the time where COVID hit our community. So if if it's up there, it'll show. And my Yupik name is Mama Slach. I'm from Scammon Bay. I have 2 kids of my own, ages 6 and 4, almost 5. So that's who I am. I'm really excited to be here and be a part of this, and I'm so happy, just to be here. So
Okay. Is it working? Okay. Hi, my name's Harmony Wayner. My Yupik name is Suruk. I'm originally from Naknek Native Village, but I live in Anchorage now. But I grew up in Unalaska. Yeah, I guess just from where I'm from and all the different places, and then I feel like that also in my day job is with NOAA, but my passion is working with the communities from Bristol Bay, and kind of defining what well-being is for us in our own voices, and that goes along with holistic health too, and trying to provide that for fisheries managers, and kind of breaking out of normal metrics that don't really apply to our communities. And then another passion of mine is working with youth, and I'm the vice chair of the Arctic Youth Network. So I've been privileged to live in different Nordic countries, and then connect with people there, and kind of see what issues we're facing at large in the Arctic, and coming up in the next generation, and trying to prevent this environmental anxiety that we're feeling when we think about changes that are pretty out of our control, and how do we find voice in fighting against and making a future that we want to see. So that's just a little bit about me. I also fish in Bristol Bay, so I was happy to have another fisherman on the panel as well.
Koyana. I'm Billy Charles, and I don't mind using the word Billy because it's a Yupik term. I'm from Mimangak, northwest of here, along the Bering Sea coast, right at the mouth of the Yukon River. We get a first shot of the salmon that are headed up toward the in the Yukon into Canada. So you actually see the fat on those salmon when they first come in. So unfortunately, lately we haven't been able to harvest as much like we'd like to. And but you know, I'm happy to be here. An opportunity for engage our communities into research, and I'd like to say that I'm bragging a little bit maybe, but translate Yupik science into the Western academia. And Koyana, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all the panelists, and thank you for your time, for be here and sharing your knowledge, and thanks for translating that stuff, Billy, because we do need to learn it. Appreciate that. For those of you in the back or standing, there's lots of seats if you want to take a minute and come find a seat. We can start the questions. I'm going to start with one question for all the panelists, and then I think we'll open it up to the audience. My question for you is, what do you see as, first of all, the emerging issue that's most positively likely to impact people in your communities, and also the one that's the most challenging? So what's the most positive and what's the most challenging holistic health impact, and across your communities, and maybe Alaska or the circumpolar north, you can add that in if you want.
Are you going to interrupt it?
Take a shot at that. the most positive impact that this work might have in our communities is the question. I think the biggest impact might, first of all, being engaged is going to be so important to our communities, I think. Able to share our ancestors and our elders' knowledge that they've been harping for years. And now with research done, we have data, the efficacy of the work that our elders have been doing for years, for millennia. Recognizing the psychologists, the philosophy, the elders, and having this be part of having them and honoring them as part of the research by representing them with this opportunity. I think the most challenging might be development and implementation of some of the good work that our elders have shared. We need to implement policy. That might be we're so used to depending on the outside. We're so used to depending on institutions. And if we develop policy, that's the next challenge, I think. But being able to and honoring our elders by having them represent here is the most positive thing. Thank you.
And if I may add, the positive impact that it has. Like I mentioned, I worked as a counselor for our health corporation before, and when we took those models from the outside, working with the youth that were having problems, a lot of them didn't fit to our culture. And from this program, taking something of our own and utilizing what they know was the most positive impact it had on our youth, because it was something that it was part of their identity, and it wasn't foreign to them. So therefore, they could relate to what was going on and continue to practice going out to the nature. And we're talking about One Health, and our culture has always believed that nature is part of us. We're part of the nature. And recognizing that and taking that, it really takes a pride in yourself and the ownership of your own culture. One of the challenges that we see, like it was mentioned this morning, was it's so expensive living out in the communities, and going out going out on a day trip, going to the hunting grounds is very expensive. And, like for fuel to get around, like we're paying $8-9 per gallon, and money is something that we're depending on to go out. So it's something that we need, some more funding sources to meet our needs.
Yeah, I guess a positive thing that I see is more of a conversation about bridging, the Western science and Indigenous knowledge, and also celebrating culture. Like I'm a counselor for the Bristol Bay Native Corporation Culture Camp, and it's really powerful to see youth and elders coming together, and youth of high school age, and being at that impressionable stage and kind of seeing what they want to do in the future, and being really grounded on the land and in those subsistence practices, because that ties in with what is challenging in that, I guess in my own experience too, I left home to pursue a career in natural resource management, and now I'm in the city, and that's kind of where the opportunities are, and it's really hard to, be in between having to do, my Western science day job, but then how to be grounded with relationships and lifestyle back home. So I see that as kind of opportunity and challenge, and how to prevent the brain drain from our communities and just from the state in general.
Thank you very much. I think it's really interesting, Harmony, that you mentioned bringing Western ways of knowing and indigenous ways of knowing together as both a really positive thing and also a really challenging thing. That's honest. Questions from the audience? Yes.
This question might be mostly for Harmony, but it could be for anyone. I'm familiar with the traditional sort of National Park Service-based um, uh, settler colonial viewpoint that says nature, by definition, is where man is not. You know, if humans are there, then by definition, that's not nature. And the less human impact in an area, the more natural it is, right? So, and then, of course, many indigenous people are going to say that's completely not correct from their point of view, right? So this would be an example of where maybe some work needs to be done, trying to find a way to mesh these different ways of knowing. But what do you do when the two viewpoints are starting off a little bit far apart, right? Do you follow what I'm thinking? Do you have a suggestion for how people make their way forward when that's the case?
Yeah, I think, well, thank you for mentioning that. Like, a lot of things I think come down to what narrative we're telling ourselves. And I think we need to get away from the narrative of like humans as parasitic on the landscape, because really it's more of a stewardship model that I agree with, and that is seen as proven for protecting biodiversity. But as far as like a personal process, I think like the two-eyed seeing model is quite good. It's Reed et al. 2020. That's like a really good paper on it. She has some great graphics. I'll put one in my speech tomorrow, so I'll do a plug for myself for that. But there's one that's like, it's like the two glasses as binoculars, and assimilation has like an arrow of, say, Western science going more, and then the indigenous knowledge to the side. And I feel like I've often been in that sort of a setting where I'm only trying to see how I can explain things in a management context in a Western way. And so I'm trying to now focus more on this narrative and storytelling approach, and we're actively trying to do that with the Arctic Youth Network, some of our initiatives. So, but thank you for bringing it up, because I'm actively thinking about all these things, but it's kind of in the process right now.
I'd rather be in the mountains thinking about the Creator than in church thinking about the mountains. I guess the point being like the narrative of the program, I'd like to see and maybe use some of these things that we value and recognize those in these services, these park service or what have you. But using some of these values and recognizing them, I think it'll be more. Um, what would you say? More at home for the people, the Native community, and get engaged in those services, I believe.
I can just say one more thing too, and that there's also the fundamental misunderstanding, I feel like, of managing the landscape versus knowing that the humans need to be managed. And so, we tell stories of, or back home, tell stories of, oh, don't take too much, and like elders would say all of those kind of things to me, and these long involved stories about basically just saying like, only take what you need and don't waste. And that's how like we can manage ourselves versus kind of that other model of managing the lands.
What do you think is the solution to stopping the brain drain, as you mentioned, to allow the opportunity for education, but then what would need to be in place for people to bring that back to their communities and use that information, that education, that knowledge to better their community, as opposed to staying in an urban area where there are job opportunities or leaving the state altogether? I mean, that's probably not a simple solution, but.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely not the expert on this subject. I would love to hear other opinions too, but like I am kind of a young person, like in between work and trying to find my way. So I feel like I'm personally experiencing like where the gaps are. And I think for me, I would love to see more interdisciplinary jobs that are actually stationed in the community and go like more bottom up. Because right now, I'll just say this off the record, but I work for NOAA, and so it's top down. Like we get our mandates from Congress, and so that's pretty hard to get mandates from DC for me in my own ideology. So I think like maybe the Sea Grant, like marine advisory agents, at least in my field, I think that's a better model because people are actually like in each community and they're listening and they're part of the community, and then they can have that other platform to go and have advocacy for the community, and kind of bottom up versus top down. So I would like to see more of those interdisciplinary natural resource management jobs like within places that people want to live.
Can I expand on that question? Is it possible for someone like what you're doing to do both, where maybe part of your job isn't at the community, but you're still serving or giving back to the community with the knowledge that you gain or the way that you do your work? Do you think that could work too?
I don't know if I even need a microphone, but yeah, I think that it's hard. It's hard to change hats all the time, and yeah, I don't know. I think that there could be a balance there. Like this is kind of off of my normal job duties. This is kind of me for fun in my other work, but it's yeah. I think there needs to be paths to feeling grounded in your culture too, while being of service, because being of service all the time is quite tiring, as I'm sure the other panelists can speak on too. And yeah, so that's all I can say on that.
Can I hear that question again?
She spoke of brain drain, of
people leaving the community or leaving the state after they have more Western education. My question was, what do you feel would need to be in place to prevent that for people that leave the community to gain more education or experience outside of the community, to bring that back to the community to benefit the people as opposed to having to leave and take that knowledge elsewhere?
I think the model that we talked about, or the prevention model that we were talking about earlier, that ties into the holistic, well, climate change. Having stability to the model that our elders are teaching, and will help the child or the student learn. I guess the point I'm trying to say, the resources that are available at the local community can be used for educating. And you get that ground, and you go out and get further education. that could be your foundation. The further education that you learn outside of the community is going to be a lot more meaningful if we utilize our resources at the local level, that the people understand. That'll engage the elders. The elders become teachers. When we're in our community, know the land, we know the resources, and we use those for teaching the values of life and values of harmony. Then you'll be able to connect those knowledge when you further your education. Maybe a curriculum around the work that, the research work that we've done would be something that needs to be reviewed, and not only curriculum at the education level, but also part of the health service.
Other questions? Yeah.
First, thank you for sharing your thoughts and your wisdom with all of us. Give us a sense of appreciation for that. As we look at climate change and how there are many changes happening, particularly in Alaska, how would you see the collaboration of the Yupik knowledge system being able to support and work with the Western knowledge system to be able to understand some of the changes that are happening because of climate change, to be able to capture some of the things that are working or that are to the benefit of Alaska Native people, but also some of the things that are bring risk to Alaska Native people and to people in Alaska. I don't know if I quite articulated that idea, but how is that climate change, and how do we use the knowledge systems to be able to leverage climate change and adapt to climate changes?
I'll take first shot at it. Take, for example, the building code. I mean, we got engineers from Arizona coming over to my community, and this is what they need. Please. And just that alone, I mean, having an adequate home brings health to the family. Having an adequate home, you could cost a lot less than the buildings that are engineered and contracted out to the housing, what do you call those? The housing
Contractors?
help me along. But though they have to use those codes, the contractors have to use those codes. but it doesn't cost that much to build a good home in our communities, but use the knowledge, the foundation. I mean, seriously, they build pilings for foundations and they kind of sift, and you couldn't do nothing about it. Imagine you sitting in that house with their home sifted one way and you couldn't fix it yourself. That's stress. That's unhealthy for the people that live there, even though it might be warm. That's just one thing, and there are many things that we could work together on and having a safe and healthy community. I could go on with many other things, but housing just comes to mind.
If I may add on, regulations. We're so regulated, whenever we get these grants that we have to comply with. And like when I was working for health corporations that dealing with our clients, we had to comply with the regulations in order to make billings, billable. And one of the activities, we're not permitted to do was, to go out and, because of the liability insurance purposes, and but that's a frustration that our elders have always said that. Gene, what's wrong with our way of life? I mean, like, what's wrong with it? And that's a pressure that our elders have always expressed to the health corporations, what's wrong with our way of doing it? And when it doesn't fit, like your shoes, it's uncomfortable. And like what Billy said about the foundations of a home, you have stronger foundations. You'll have something more solid if you work it from the bottom on up with the good foundations, and you have a sturdy home. I might be a little bit off on that one, but it's just the regulations that it just doesn't fit within our way of life. Joy.
Yeah, I could add on that too, and that I really agree in terms of like the systems in place for regulation of natural resource management or hunting and fishing rights. It's like the system's already in place, like without us. And so how do we fit in? It's like a square peg into a round hole type of situation. And it's pretty hard, to express how much salmon means to us in my community in a 3-minute testimony, for example. Like, yeah, it's just it's a system that isn't inclusive of different ways of communication rather than quick academic writing, testimony that's good public speaking, so I definitely have a problem with that.
One quick thing, sorry about this, but apparently they can't pick up, they're recording this, so students can use it, and if you could use the mics just for that. Sorry about that, I didn't know that. I thought it would come through the air.
So I guess I could touch on that. So over the past few years, I didn't get to finish it. I was looking at it on it last night. Like over the past few years, we've watched our youth become, especially the young men. We've watched our young men become young men to where we would go on activities and they would be the ones who were driving for us. They would be the ones who were doing this and that for us in our activities. And, you know, we had to share with them that our work will only continue if you guys share with our tribe that this is what you guys want in our community. And Scammon Bay, for example, we didn't get the extra 5 years for our community because our tribe didn't apply for that grant, and it's one of the SAMHSA grants. But it's coming up here soon, and you know, a lot of our youth are now they're our voices. A lot of them say, what would we do without Kongasvik? What would we do without this in our community? So I think that leadership kind of naturally builds up as the years go on with the youth. They kind of have their own voice about how they could make a difference in our community, because it can't be just us. As much as we voice ourselves in the community, when it comes from the youth themselves, it's a stronger voice. When they want change in our community, it's stronger. So I feel like over the years, they've really grown and, you know, filled those shoes where they needed to be filled. And I feel like in Scammon Bay in particular, with just their voices, hopefully the grant will be applied for this year. And with the kids saying they want it back, they need it back, I really hope that's what'll happen. So
The other challenge around this is consistency. This model, the YIPIC model that can be applied anywhere, I said that this morning, builds character in a child, disciplines a child, and we need to be consistent in all parts of our YIPIC neighboring villages. Because too many times we have different projects come in with a different model, and that confuses the young child. We're so fragmented, we're not sending the same message, but with the model, we're sharing the same message for all the groups. There's Tuksuk, Scammon, Imong, Olognak, we're sharing the same thing. Where before, you know, it was up to the funders where the model is going to come from.
I'll say one more thing on youth leadership too, in that I think it's pretty powerful to have youth-led things, that like the Arctic Youth Network, because that's what I'm involved in, that's what I know about. But I think the difference there with our program is that it's like the whole board that I'm on is all youth, and we are all youth run. We don't have, you know, someone telling us what to do. It's very driven from what we see as needs in our own communities, and that was driven out of the observation across kind of the Arctic space, in that there wasn't the voices of the young generation of Arctic youth. So I think it's powerful to see like a panel of people going to something like Arctic Circle Assembly, and us all sharing about what we see in our communities, and kind of having a platform because we're supporting each other. And I think the key there is that it's a group, and the togetherness in our individual leadership, because if we don't have support of each other, it's pretty hard to do this type of work.
You talked about bottom-up approaches to things, as opposed to, like Billy was talking about, the funding before, when the funding agency dictates what you have to do, and so you have to do that instead of what you really want to do. Do you guys have any thoughts on how we can change that paradigm? I mean, I think you've shown us that when you do change it, it works. But any thoughts on how we might be able to change that?
Data.
No, that's a great answer. That's a great answer.
And like Simeon says, you know, our elders want to be part of the solution to the problems, but they never had the data. But now we have data, and thank you for the researchers. Your level of your qualities, able to take a snapshot of the life of a Yupik person and be able to measure the outcomes of doing Yupik things in a cultural way, both mind, physical, and spiritual, and allowing us to share our spiritual way, and you're able to find a way of measuring that efficacy. Thank you so much.
You know, that's something that our elders have always been frustrated about, that they have never been heard. And even on the board level with our health corporations, my late dad used to really advocate for that, but he always, out of frustrations, and say that, how come they don't listen to me? And because he knew all along that, you know, it would work. And, you know, I'm always grateful for our researchers, like what Billy said. And now that it seems like they're starting to see more and recognizing, and very grateful for people that stepping up to helping us out to do some researching and learning more about our culture. And it seems like this may be a little too strong for some, but I see them as a godsend of our ancestors, of their will. And wish that they were here to witness it now. But it's something that is finally arising, coming to reality. So And it proves that, you know, Huangu we the people, have always knew and had that intuity that we have ways to resolve our own issues. And like they've always said that, you know, we don't need to look elsewhere to seek help. We always had it.
Kind of a weird question, so I apologize, but there was a mention earlier of policy change, and I think we all can agree that that's really what needs to happen, but do you believe that policy change is the key to reestablishing self-determination? Is that what really needs to happen to give that back? And if not, what does need to happen?
You know, I think I mentioned I've been in public service for, you know, more than half my life, and I see projects come and go, get funding for prevention or intervention, and funding runs out and goes away. I think now, for self-determination, I think that the data that we have for prevention needs to be disseminated to the leadership out there. We all know we have this, what do you call it, that self-determination, but many of us in our communities don't see that, you know, this efficacy, this data, I think needs to be disseminated. Then we won't talk about, well, they took my way of life away. Well, take it back. You know, sometimes we are our own worst enemy. Now, I think we should run with this.
Yeah, I agree that sometimes the policy change and different initiatives are a step, but there has to be so much healing within the community that needs to happen still. And I see that in culture camp, you know, like letting go of the shame, and just, you know, elder says every year to the kids, like, you should be so proud for being Native. And it brings me to tears, like, every year. So I think the treating of trauma and the healing has to happen along with the policy, because again, it's the cycle of somewhere in a room they're making this decision, but the people still have that, they're carrying the shame, and we're carrying the those things that still need to be healed.
We don't want to take away the good work that the leadership is doing. They're developing young people, building capacity and capability at the regional level, but still, you know, the communities tend to fall through the cracks, and they don't have the capacity and capability. But many villages do, but still, you know, this is a cause of disparities in our communities, because, you know, we need to build that capacity, that capability, and run with the data.
person, and I was talking about some ideas from the research about his community, and he was listening, and after a while he said, well, I'm listening to the words you're saying, and I'm translating them into Yupik. And then I see more how this applies to my community. And I'm really interested in that idea of how many of the thought concepts about relationship to nature, about how the natural world works, about how we can, effectively confront these challenges are really embedded in the language. And I'm just wondering if you have any more examples of that idea or ways the scientists here can move that forward and make that happen more often. Don't forget the microphone.
It's not that it's not happening. I think to some degree this is already happening. My brother is a linguist at the university here, and he uses language first and translate or what do you, when you think about it, what's the word? I'm not like Waki. I just went up to high school and that was it. But that's not bad, Yupik was my first language, and we taught our mom how to speak English, so she spoke broken English, and when she taught in Yupik, the values, knowledge, for the mind, the body, and the spirit. She'd be saying this in Yupik. And at the end of that lesson, she'd say, "You go college." I mean, she's literally saying, because of my teachings, that's a college level. That's what she was saying to us. But that goes away from the question, I think. But the language is embedded. The prevention is embedded into language. And it's so, I don't know how to explain that, but I think that's, Simeon does this a lot. He says in Yupik first before it helps him register in his mind what he wants to say in English. I don't think I'm rambling.
Yeah, being a Yupik speaker, that just like what Billy said, it's always a lot easier for me to speak it in Yupik, let it out, because it just naturally flows through my mind, and it's after I say it in Yupik, it's better. Well, English is my second language, so. And sometimes when I'm speaking English, I have to scramble for the words. It's already in my mind, but it's just the vocabulary of how I should take it out. But, like what it is, I was mentioning my late father about his frustrations that were not heard, and we have a lot of words in our Yupik language that are what they say $100 $1 million word that there's no some of them don't have a translations into English because they're so precise. When you say something in Yupik, it's so precise that it pertains to only that, and there's no other way. So Many times when we're going through our retreat with our Kongazvik group, you know, some word that would pop up, I would share it with our group, and we would elaborate on that one, and it comes to be more clearer for our researchers to when we say it in Yupik. There's a good knowledge that our elders have, and some of them, like what Billy said, they're just so high level Yupik speaker words that aren't hardly spoken. Go ahead.
Like the word interdisciplinary. We got a word for that. Ilakuluta. Sharing one another's knowledge and moving forward like a kazyak. It's communal, it's complete, it's holistic.
Throughout Alaska, what percentage of health services are bilingual? Maybe offering Yupik in English or something like that.
Or an approximation, is it like 20% or 50 or 80% or?
A little bit I know from just description of mental health services. It's not like, for example, if you go to northern Norway, where the Sami, you can get all your services in Sami language. I don't think it's really possible for someone to get clinical services in Yupik right now in Alaska. And, I mean, they could maybe go talk to someone like Simeon in their community, and of course you would be helpful. You might likely talk to Yupik, but going into your health services corporation, it's not something that's done right now. And maybe that's a problem.
So my next question then is, how can we train more people in the health services to understand Yupik and speak it?
They gotta want to. I'm not on the panel, but there's way too many dialects is part of the problem, I would say.
Yeah.
Like that's one little part of the problem is that,
What was the question?
there's way too many dialects. Like I'm Alaska Native, but I'm Athabascan. I'm from Tanacross. So the words that my community speaks is very different than even 50 miles away in one direction, which is also different than 50 miles in that direction. And ironically, actually, our Upper Tanana Athabascan language, some of our words are closer to Navajo than 50 miles away from us. So to understand each language, to formulate it in written, to teach it, that's a huge undertaking. But what I was going to ask too, kind of sort of off of that, is, so we have like this Western system that has all of these rules and regulations, like the building codes, right? And then we have our more like traditional value system. And how could we make, or do you know of any systems that would kind of require accreditation or give credit to like people who want to learn more about different cultures, and they could get actual like credit instead of like CEU credit for our providers to go into a classroom and learn things, but how do you have like a system or an accreditation system that so the people in this room are are wanting and interested, but how could we require everybody to be like the building codes, right?
Cultural competency?
Yeah, like, but required.
Right, but like,
Yeah,
okay.
something like that. But like, how can we have, is there anything like that, that we could say, hey, this is what we want health, our health organization to have this award because we have this and we require all of our staff to take it. Is there anything like that?
You know, that's an idea. I mean, we have these, many of the tribes, even the providers, the health corporations and the regional nonprofits, they have that 638 rule, the federal government that goes to tribes and provide services. They help build capacity, capability to run their higher education, the, what else is there? The social service. But those are just small funding, just for building capacity. And we need something like that that'll just focus on what you're talking about, making a requirement to start to implement some of these the knowledge that we, we talked about expanding this work that data-driven work into the communities for suicide prevention and all the disparities, but just that alone is so much work that these service providers don't have time for it. They don't have time to save lives of the children because they got federal regulations to comply with, to report to. The housing needs reporting, the social service needs reporting, and all these other services they have to report. We got no time for our kids. Again, that's an idea. Maybe they might figure a way to require some of these, well, make the requirement. I don't know.
I guys always explain what pivot means in English. How you always explain what pivot mean in English?
Give it.
Yeah. When you do not somebody in their face get funny and they pout.
Not quite sure. Kind of hard of hearing.
Like when you scold somebody and their face get down and they, start acting funny after you scold them. How you explain that into English? We got word for it. Pivot.
Give it. That's Inupiaq.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I'm sure you got word for it too, and when you try to explain that into English, how you explain it?
Well, I think there's a different system of teaching, because I have a heartburn about, reprimanding a child in the classroom in front of everybody. There's a time for that. So our elders would take them aside at a proper time and tell them about the conduct that might be inappropriate. Is that where we're going? Nakpak.
Other question from the audience?
Thank you for this wonderful panel. I want to ask a question about holistic health, kind of generally. Billy, you mentioned something about stress and, how, if your house is kind of off a little bit, then that's stressful and that contributes to, poor health. And I'm thinking about different conceptualizations of what health is and how it culture, stress isn't really included in like what we constitute health. It's a side effect of like the grind, and that's really glorified. And so stress doesn't really contribute to our concept of health often. And I would like to hear from you all if there are any other elements of the concept of health that we don't think about usually, that are top of mind for us in like Western culture.
I really like this subject, so thank you for bringing this up. I it's funny because in school, like in my master's, I was thinking about this through like peer-reviewed literature, but then I just went home and like talked to my grandma, and she was like, "Yeah, of course, relationships are number one. Like that's really what it's about, is how healthy are your relationships." And in Western, it's all the metrics of buy this Fitbit tracker, and like how much did you walk today, and how much can you like eat well, and all of these things that are basically, if you have enough money to buy all the gadgets and hire the right therapist and have all these things, then you'll be the best off. But really, they're not looking at like the picture of the person like in their surroundings. And so then it just comes back to relationships, and we can't, in my opinion, we can't be healthy individualistically like in a Western system. So yeah, that's kind of my answer.
One of the I have a grandmother that's 104 years old. Well, actually, she's my grandmother's first cousin, but we call her my grandma. And she's sharp yet mentally, and she still gets up and around, but her eyesights are, and her hearing is not getting too well. But when I asked her, what does it take to stay healthy? And I told her, if I was your age at 104, and she's still straight up like this. She's not. And she told me that, it's all in the mind. The mind never gets old. But if you dwell on too much on what bad, your body is going to follow your physical health. And to continue to do chores, because if you sit around too much, dust's gonna fall on your shoulders and it gets heavy over your weight. So you gotta keep busy and keep brushing that dust off. That was her secret. Thought I'd share that.
I think the idea of individualism is a stressor. Your own universe. You're not thinking about your neighbor like we used to a long time ago. We come to start to compete with one another. Even the animals. It's like our young people are competing anymore. I mean, we used to use spears. We still use spears in my community for seal hunting because, we tag them. Then you could follow them and use a bigger harpoon to retrieve them. Because in the river, if you shoot them, you might lose it in the water. But out in the ocean, salt water, and you don't need the spears. You could shoot them and retrieve them while they're still afloat. That even that is becoming a competition. Who's going to throw further and who's going to, and they forget the importance of sharing. The first shot at the seal gets a certain part of the mammal, and the second person that throws, well, they don't do that anymore. They take one, shoot it, put it in a boat, go look for another one. There's no sharing anymore. There's that individualism and like that mentality of commercial is a stressor. It becomes a norm. We need to go back to how we used to share. Just by going out as a group, finding mammals or animal to catch, we forget the importance of sharing. That's a stressor.
I'm curious to hear about when it comes to holistic health and resilience, when it comes to grief and loss, whether it's like helping a community or individually.
Grief and loss. I think we keep going back. I mean, we have. I think every time we talk here, the three of us, we're talking about the data and the research that was already done. And if you're really interested, we have a website that for coping, one for kinship, one for sharing, and many others. There's a website for that as well, and that's the model. That's a holistic model, and raising family in the community. It's almost like encouraging the whole community raising one child. Everyone saying the same thing. Everybody thinking the same way. And this morning I mentioned, because my father used to say this all the time, because we're not thinking the same anymore, it's because though we're having to face all these challenges now, because we're not thinking alike.
I think that a big part of how our people go through grief is, a lot of our, like my kids, for example, are named after people. And that's kind of how, when Scam Bay had a string of suicides, a lot of kids were named after the people who committed suicide. And that's a part of our cultures. We name our kids after the people who passed away. And it doesn't matter how they pass away, but they're named after them. And that's, there's people who I lost that I was very close to, and I see their kids and I tease them the same way that I tease who they're named after. And I think that a part of grief is a big part of grief is, the namesake part of it, because they don't leave. They don't. It's hard to describe. They don't leave us, because their namesakes are there. And I think Simeon could touch on this because he had incidents, where you said your grandson's named after your dad, and your grandson did some things that your dad would do. So I think that's a part of, I guess that's a part of our grief is, we have ways to move on. We have no choice but to move on, no matter what. And we stress that a lot with our cultures. You have to keep busy. You have to keep going, no matter what So I don't, I guess I could say that, you know, a part of our grief is through the namesakes. And, you know, I do that specifically with one of my cousins. And I think that's our kind of our way of moving on is through that namesake.
Yeah, if you know, going through grief is something that we all experience when there's a loss, either a close relative or our culture. And one thing that my dad told us was that, you know, this lady, his cousin, dreamt about. She was going through grief, and she had lost her child, and she was grieving. And in her dream, she told me that, you know, quit grieving for me, quit crying for me. You're getting my hair never dries because of your tears. Because you've been grieving too much. And so in her dream, her son told him to quit grieving for him because it's part of life. He's in a good place. And that night at the Yawak performance, what we called, she got dressed and combed her hair very, you know, beautiful, braided them, and she was relieved that she was informed that he was in a good place, and she was no longer stuck in that. But you know, grief is something that, like she mentioned, that whenever somebody passes away in our community, the close relatives named after their child, after that person that passes on, and it's then like it saves the grieving people when knowing that who that child is named after, and we use it a lot. And you know, I have a grandson that I named after my dad, and it amazes me of what he does, and he reminds me a lot of what my dad used to do in his thoughts. You know, he was only about 3 years old when we went out fishing, and I was so gumriyuk. What's the word for gumriyuk in English? But I was so chuckled that when he told me, and he was only 3 years old, and I've never told him about sharing. And you know, we had a whole boatload of fish on our way home. He came up to me and said, you know, Appa, you know, he calls me Appa, Grandpa, in our language, you know. He said, you know, once we get home, we're going to pass all this fish to our community, especially for those that don't have fish or who cannot go out and get fish. And I was so touched by that because he was only 3 years old. And he said, you know, in Yupik, he said, Appa, ping sagaling ujikichikapuk kiskumugnuk. Saying that, you know, we'll share what we got for especially for those who don't have. So, yeah, grieving in a way is, you know, it is something that a lot of us, you know, even with the loss of our way of doing things in our community, even the language itself, especially for the youth, I think that's something that really hurts a lot of youth because they're not able to speak their language or associate with their grandparents. And I see that. And like I mentioned, that within my household, we all speak the Yupik language, but I have to fight to maintain that. Every time my grandkids come in with another child, and if there's one English speaker, they will all speak the English, but I have to maintain and walk up to them and say, Yuhtun, you speak our language in our house. So grievance, yeah, and language, Yuhtun, is something that I see in the youth that you can tell. Sometimes they get angry and say that, how come my mom and dad didn't show me or didn't teach me my language?
Very quickly, this is not in the Kungasbek or on the website. It's about, it's a potlatch, but it's not, we don't call it potlatch, we call it forcing an encounter. And we do the song and dance and we do the naming. And when we name them, when we do the naming, the family of the child that passed on, that is being named, have to share those gifts. And those gifts take time and mending or carving. Those are things that keep you busy. You're thinking about someone, but that's for purpose of naming a person that keeps you busy, and in a spiritual way. That's, I believe, is a lot to do with coping or grieving. It's not in a book.
Thank you very much for all the knowledge and wisdom that you've shared with us today. It's been fantastic, and I really appreciate the questions from the audience and the really well thought out answers from our panel. I'd like to give our panel a high hand. So now there's a little bit of a break, and then at 5:30 there's the movie. Yeah, the movie is supposed to be there. Thank you so much. Fantastic.
Oh, you got a good one. Yeah, but it's called. Hey, Billy. I was just wondering.